Hello everybody, welcome to day 9. We're in the last lesson of the class now, which is lesson 6 from unit 3. And today's topic is the Battle of the Bulge, December 1944 till January 1945. On the slides that I've attached on Google Classroom, I'm looking at slides 1 through 7. Of course, slide 1 is the title slide. Slide 2 shows the situation in Europe in 1944. You can see that part of Holland is still controlled by Germany, but the Americans have managed to push right up to the German border, and at least one case cross over the border. From the east side, or the right-hand side of the map, you can see that the Russians are pushing into, they've already invaded Hungary, Yugoslavia, they've already captured Romania, and they're already within Poland and right on the verge of pushing into East Prussia. They've already taken big chunks of the Baltic states back. If you remember my story about Sieg, you can see how some of the Germans will get trapped up there in the Baltic. So December 1944, when Americans are enjoying a Christmas dinner and getting mail from home and thinking nothing's really going to happen until springtime, Hitler's got one last gamble. He's been creating the wonder weapons, the V1 buzz bomb, which is kind of like a cruise missile, the V2 rocket, which today would be like a short-range or medium-range ballistic missile. And they're working on atomic weapons. They never succeed, but they were about halfway there. As Germany collapses in 1945, the Allies, all of them, as they run over chunks of Germany, are looking for these laboratories and scientists that had some information and some knowledge about atomic weapons and Germany's programs so they can use it for their own programs. But that story is for Wednesday, I think. Anyway, so he plans one last attack, one big attempt to bust through the Allied lines in one last blitzkrieg, one last hurrah. And the place chosen is a spot right along the seam of where the American army stops in the north and the British army picks up and moves on. And they feel that if the Germans can bust through right there and separate the British and Canadian armies from the American army and reach the port city of Antwerp, they'll fall in on all the supplies that are there. They'll pick up gasoline, ammunition, everything they need on the way. And they'll be able to pull off something that politically might cause the Allies to say, all right, time out, let's just end the war from our side and let the Russians handle their own problems. This is wishful thinking on Hitler's part. The Allies never intend something like this will not break up Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, okay? All right, so they wait until the weather is going to be really bad, which puts it right around Christmas time. They figure the week or two before Christmas. The attack actually comes on December 16th. The Allies were growing complacent. Old units were being rebuilt on the border, and new equipment was being issued. New units were put on the border to gain experience in peaceful, quiet places, and those new units end up being directly in the path of the German SS Panzer Blitzkrieg. Now, as I said, the attack goes off on December 16th, 1944. The early morning attacks were very surreal because nobody knew that the Germans had built up forces of hundreds and hundreds of tanks and thousands of men and equipment. None of them were spotted. The secret was not lost. And when the attack went off, it came as a shock and a surprise to the Americans. The Germans were doing all kinds of weird things. There was no air attack preceding this because the Luftwaffe was mostly destroyed. And so that part of the Blitzkrieg never happened, strangely. There was no air piece, but they did drop special forces groups behind American lines dressed in American uniforms to change road signs around and wipe out military police groups and misdirect people and cause all kind of chaos, which they were very successful at doing. The other thing they did, it was weird, a lot of Americans remember, they set up searchlights, spotlights on the low-hanging clouds, because it was, the middle of winter and it was a winter season. The clouds were low, and the searchlights reflected off the clouds. And the reason behind that was to give the German soldiers their direction of march in the dark. So the Germans followed the beam of the searchlight away from where they were, and that gave them the azimuth they needed to move through the woods at night. And of course, the Americans didn't know what this was. The American front lines collapsed everywhere. Pockets of Americans fought on for hours or for days and then surrendered. And it becomes known as the Battle of the Bulge because the Germans pushed through kind of an arrowhead-shaped bulge into the American lines. And they get about 2/3 of the way to Antwerp before the Americans can finally stop them. One of the things that the Germans are critically concerned about are timetables, because they have to get this whole thing done before the weather clears, so they know they only have about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. And also logistics. They know they don't have enough fuel to do this, and that they were going to have to rely on captured supply dumps of American fuel in order to fuel all of their stuff, which they do. The Americans are able to slow the Germans down and stop them just enough, in just enough times and in just enough places, that they never make it to where they need to go before the weather clears and the American Air Force comes out and the tables turn. The other thing is there's one particular city, the city of Bastogne, which, kind of like Gettysburg, was a town with roads radiating out like spokes of a wagon in every direction. It became clear to the Americans that if they could hold on to that town, even if they were surrounded, that would slow down and screw up the German timetables enough that the Germans would not be able to recover from that. And that's exactly what happened. Now, what I find interesting is the units they threw into Bastogne right before it was surrounded were the 101st Airborne Division, which is why if you watch Band of Brothers, you see all that stuff happening in Bastogne. My wife's uncle, Barney, was actually there. His unit was run over by the Germans, the German 5th Parachute Regiment, to be specific. About December 19th, December 20th, at a little crossroads where they were trying to get their first hot meal. And the battery was basically wiped out. The guns were all destroyed, still attached to the trucks. One group of trucks was able to drive away, A battery, but the rest of the batteries, he was in C battery, they were all just wiped out. And Barney ran off. He told me he ran off into the woods with 3 enlisted soldiers. And he had a pair of binoculars, a .45 caliber pistol, and about 3 K rations. And they walked and walked and walked until they got to Bastogne. And he said, finally, we're rescued. We're at Bastogne. And the guys at Bastogne said, buddy, you don't even know what you're in for. You're surrounded. We're surrounded. You're not really rescued. And so he acted as a forward observer and a guy who called in artillery fire for the infantry for the rest of the time he was at Bastogne. And he remembered Christmas Eve at Bastogne because the Germans bombed the city. Their very last bomber mission ever. They got together whatever bombers they had and tried a bomber mission and bombed the city of Bastogne in the dark, in the clouds. I mean, they had like no visibility. So anyway, the siege at Bastogne really, and the change of the weather really made the turning point occur. The American Air Force came out. They dropped supplies to the people in Bastogne. And parachutes full of food and ammunition came down, medical supplies. Armored forces from the south under Patton and from the north under Montgomery fought their way to Bastogne from the north and the south and essentially pinched the Bulge in half. And the Germans realized they'd run out of gas. And for all their wonder weapons, like they had a brand new tank they were using, the King Tiger, Königstiger, those things sucked up a lot of gas, and they had to basically abandon them where they ran out of gas. And some of them are still, if you look at the slides, I think I put a picture, slide 5, there's a picture of a King Tiger in a little village in the Ardennes, pretty much left where it was when it ran out of gas, and now it's a little monument in the village. Anyway, slide 6 shows you the map of the Bulge, and you can see Bastogne there. And the Germans were forced to retreat. Now, they retreated back almost to their starting point, but not right away. And unfortunately for people at Bastogne, instead of being, once they get rescued, instead of being taken out of the line and sent to the rear for hot chow, and no, they're in the attack for all through January. So by the middle of January, they're right back to their start points. And then some unsettling things start to appear. It appears that large groups of American prisoners of war had been massacred by the Germans. This is considered war crime, of course. And the worst spot is a place called Malmedy, where anti-aircraft unit was marched into a field and then just machine gunned. And so all of this will come out at the war crimes trials, which happen about a year later. And all those people will pay for their crimes. So anyway, this whole event of the battle, like I said, December to January 1945, Hitler exhausts his last reserves, his last groups of spare troops or spare equipment. And it's an epic fail. The Germans call it the von Rundstedt offensive. They don't call it the Battle of the Bulge. General von Rundstedt was the guy in charge. So at this point, once the Americans reorganize themselves, they really do say, okay, well, we're able to destroy that attack. There was also another smaller attack to the south. I think it was called Operation West Wind or something. It was a smaller version of the Bulge to the south, meant as a distraction. Either way, that didn't work either. And the battle for Germany will begin February, March 1945. All right, so that's it for now, and I'll talk to you guys again on Wednesday. Have a good Monday.